Hi, welcome. I'm Sarah D, and this is...
I'm Dr. D.
And we're here to have another economic conversation. Last week, we mentioned something called the long run and the short run. And we were talking about it. Am I doing wrong?
No.
What are you doing that look for?
'Cause.
You don't like my long and shorts?
Well, no, they're good. They're long and short. Yep. But how long something is doesn't tell you whether you're in the long run or the short run.
Oh, man. But that's how we think of long run and short run, right? That's how, okay, so we can start there.
Yeah.
This is, if you think of long run, you think long is longer than short, but not necessarily so.
Right.
Okay, so long run and short run. We have two studies, at least, in Econ. One of them is micro and one of them is macro, correct? And we were talking about, what's his name? Friedman?
Milton Friedman.
Okay, and he was you called him something.
A monetarist.
A monetarist, yes. And he was talking about something that we talked about, and not Trump, Biden was talking about something. Biden was talking about
Transitory inflation.
transitory inflation, which happens, he's playing with the magnets, in the short run. No matter how long the short run is, transitory inflation happens in
Short run.
the short run.
It's a short run phenomenon.
And the other kind of inflation we talked about was not transitory, it was
Permanent.
permanent inflation. And permanent inflation is actually longer than this. It's just like infinite.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, it's long run.
But we don't have infinite ones of these, so it happens in the long run. Okay.
So what I want you to do is I want you to hold that up.
I'm going to hold this up.
Okay. And I'm going to pull this apart. I'm going to put this in here. And we're going to pull this apart.
That's right.
I'm going to
That's
put that
a good
in here.
idea.
And we're going to do it like this. And we're going to
must
talk
be a
about
teacher.
the long run and the short run.
Uh-huh.
The long run, let's say the long run are these balls.
Oh.
When we're in the long run, we're where one of these balls is. We're in the long run and something happens. And it takes the economy a while to resolve it. That's the short run.
There's something that happens called a shock.
A shock.
Okay.
And that shock happens, the economy resolves itself back into the
long
long run. And another shock happens.
And it goes for as long as it goes, but it's still called...
So that's a longer short run
It is, but it's still a short
Short
run and
run.
it's still transitory.
until we hit another.
Transitory is until we get into that long run.
Resolve ourselves to
again.
the long run, and then we have another shock. Now the problem is that what really happens is like we have a billion shocks all at once, and we're never ever really in anything but a short run because we never make it to where the ball is.
We never do.
Never make it to where the ball is.
We never get into the long run because the long run is the ideal.
It's an aspirational. It's a trajectory. It's a place that the economy aims to.
And that long run is a place where you said producers...
Oh, now it depends.
No.
Now it depends.
Micro and macro, right?
Now we got to divide into two different fields of econ.
Let's divide and I will listen.
Okay, so
Ask what I
in
want.
macroeconomics, we talked about shocks to the economy as a whole. COVID was a shock to the economy as a whole.
It was very macro.
And it caused a distortion in the economy, and it drove us out of whatever our long run destination would have been, and the economy had to work its way through it as it moved its way back towards another long run equilibrium point.
So here we were before, here's COVID, and then here we are now?
Well, we could be, but so the deal is that pretending like we were in the long run, a shock happened, COVID, the economy transitions and recovers from it, and then we're back into a new long run. But the question is, how long does it take? Is it a purple bar or is it...
How long is that shock? Those ones don't go together.
That's
I told
okay.
you. They don't like
We'll
each
make
other.
it go together. Or is it a super long shock, right? We don't know. We never know for sure how long it's going to take. So we engage in government policies to help to resolve it away from to resolve the shock, to help the economy resolve the shock. Because we don't know definitely how nasty the shock is going to cause, what kind of nasty outcome it's going to cause. It could cause a Great Depression.
But the news does, because they said it's going to always cause.
It always, right? The news knows everything, right? So somebody sneezed, it's going to cause a Great Depression. That's true. Not necessarily the case.
No, not necessarily.
No. But the thing about the economy resolving is it's always going to be painful for some, if not all. It can be painful for all, but it will always be painful for some. Some are going to get hurt as the economy resolves. Whether it's a microeconomic or a macroeconomic shock. So, for example, with COVID, when everybody locked up and didn't go out to work, people could have all lost their jobs. If nobody's working, then there's nothing being produced and there's no food being shipped from farms. It's not that the food isn't growing, because the food doesn't care about COVID. It just grows. So it's not that the food isn't growing. It's not the farmers aren't working on their farm, because COVID doesn't mean that much when you're working on your farm. But it does mean that the processing plants are probably not working appropriately, and the grocery stores aren't working appropriately, and we can go down the list of the things that aren't working appropriately. So if I live in a city and COVID hits and everything's locked down, my choice, if we allow it to just work its way out, is to go out and get COVID and die, or starve to death because there's no food and die. Those are my choices. Those are ugly outcomes. Now, the deal is that eventually the population will thin out and COVID won't be a problem anymore because we've thinned out the population.
Those that are going to die are going to die.
Right. So but it's not a pleasant outcome. So we decide we're going to do something else.
So the government stepped in.
Yes. So the government stepped in, and the government helped with making sure that certain industries stayed populated. It made sure that the people in those industries got vaccinated first. So they were like first in line for getting the happiness pills and shots or whatever. And so the government stepped in and organized things so that we could kind of work our way through that transition to the next long run less painfully. And so that's a macroeconomic long run.
And also the checks too.
Right, checks also checks. Also, there's all sorts of. I mean,
helping the companies with.
Right, they underwrote the development of vaccines, something that the government doesn't generally do. So they underwrote the risk associated with developing a vaccine.
That's why they were able to be developed
so quickly. That's right, because the risk was underwritten by the taxpayer, not the government's. It's a strong term, but the taxpayer underwrote, guaranteed that research money wouldn't be lost. And so that allowed for a quicker drive through that particular shock. We're still driving through it, but it wasn't as nasty as it could have been.
So we're in a short run.
We're in a short run.
We're not in a long run. We're calling this a long run now as opposed to the long short thing I did, because that was not correct.
Right, because the long run is a point that we're shooting for.
Go figure. I'm not the economist.
The long run is like a point that we're shooting for. And oh, by the way, we may never achieve it, right? So because shocks happen all the time, right? So that we're working our way towards the long run, and a hurricane comes and destroys the shrimp business in Louisiana or whatever, right?
So that might be a micro shock as opposed to a macro shock.
Well, it depends upon how it reverberates through, because it could destroy the oil industry. It could destroy, right? There's lots of things along that Gulf Coast that we care about. So it could be a macro shock. Right? So it could be a macro shock. It could be just a micro shock. Okay. And so that's the way we think about the long run. And we think about it in two different ways, right? So I guess the way I like to think about the macroeconomic long run and short run, an easy way for me to think about it is I think about the stock market. So for example, if I put my money...
That sounds easy.
Yes, stock market, easy.
Sorry.
I put my money in an S&P 500 fund.
Okay.
And on average it will earn...
Oh, and that's, okay, on average it will earn 10%?
About 10% a year, 11 years, 11%. Every 7 years it will double, however you want to think about it. So on average it's gonna earn 10% year in, year out.
And that is the long run.
That's the average, right?
That's actually a long run that you can look at individually that actually...
You look at
back in history and...
You can't look forward. If you look forward in history, you'll probably see the same thing.
Probably.
But they always tell you never, just because it happened in the past doesn't mean it's going to happen in the future. But the deal is that, the S&P 500 is down 15% today, right? So
From what it started at the beginning.
At the beginning of the year, right. So in half a year, it's down 15%. That's not a 10% a year gain.
So if you looked at that, is that what...
The 10% a year gain is the dot.
The 10% a year gain, okay, is the long run. So this is a shock or a shock.
Yeah.
The shock is, oh my goodness, it's not doing what it should. I should take my money out.
Right. So it had a shock down, but the year before it had a shock up of 24%. Again, not 10%, right? So the short run is very erratic because it has things that happen. The long run is kind of that planning horizon. When I put money in my S&P 500 fund for retirement, I plan on it doubling every 10 years. That's my planning horizon. Or every 7 years, or every whatever years. I plan on this 10% return, and that's my planning horizon. That's my long run thought process. Does it do that every year? No. That's the short run. In the short run, it doesn't do that every year. But on average, in the long run, it will do it. So across my lifetime, it's reasonable to expect.
And it's panned out.
It has panned out, yes.
It has panned out.
Yeah, but I've been alive a long time.
Well, yes.
Yeah. If I just started last year, I'd be very freaked out by it.
Yeah, because then you might not trust it, and you might think you should go into some fast money.
Yeah.
Which is some fast not money.
Yeah, exactly. So we're not going to do that. But the deal is that that's the way to think about long run. One of them is more aspirational. One of them is more target. The other one is what we're dealing with today.
All right. So are we going to go any further in it?
We can talk now about...
We have time?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And we're going to talk about the macroeconomic... we talked about macroeconomic long run, short run. And we really talked a lot about it in our last post when we talked about inflation versus permanent and transitory inflation and the idea of macroeconomic long run and macroeconomic short run. And we just were elucidating long run and short run. There's a long run and short run...
And because like the news doesn't want to say it, and people
Well,
they want to say that we're in a long run shock and we're going to be forever on this downturn.
Yeah, it's always
this or that.
The news sells many more views when it catastrophizes
For some
things.
reason, you like to look at the doom stuff.
Yeah.
What is that?
So, or kittens making kids giggle. That right, one or the other,
to try,
right?
To try to cancel it out.
We're gonna look at these two extremes, and we're not gonna look at what's kind of more in the middle, right where my heart is.
Yeah.
Oh.
And the middle is the long run.
Kind of, yeah. That's a way to think of it too.
Keep going.
That's a way to think of it.
I cut you off,
So
sure.
that's when we think about it from perspective of macroeconomics.
Okay.
From the perspective of microeconomics, they also use the term long run and short run, but they mean very different things.
And what do they mean, pray tell?
Well, so in microeconomics, when I'm talking about a firm or a person or an industry, so when I talk about microeconomics, I'm talking about a particular agent or set of agents in an economy, not the economy as a whole. So I'm looking at like the market for gasoline, or I'm looking at the market for housing, or I'm looking at the market for wheat, or I'm looking at how people make decisions on how much wheat and how much barley to buy. That's microeconomics. And in microeconomics, they also talk about the long run and the short run.
And so when you were talking about prices of houses, in one of our other posts, we talked about housing and how the prices were going.
To come down.
They were going to come down because interest rates were being raised.
Yeah.
And people told you were a fool. But what's happening?
Well, prices of houses is slowing down. So housing prices aren't racing upwards, and they weren't going to as interest rates rise. They won't race up as fast as they were. It's going to slow down, and they may fall depending upon where you are. Different places will have different impacts.
But that's a short run thing.
So that's so.
Or not in micro. It's not.
So in micro, it's yeah. So in microeconomics, we're talking about something different.
That's not short run.
No, it may be short run. It may be long run.
What is it?
Oh, well, let's talk about it.
Well, I'm excited.
Okay.
That's another word.
So when we're talking about a microeconomic marketplace, We're talking about the short run or the long run is any time you have the ability to choose across all your possibilities.
The short run is.
The long run. You can choose across all your possibilities.
Okay.
And this is terribly meaningful to, especially on the supply side, to suppliers. But it's also important to consumers, right? But as a general rule, we talk about it on the supply side. And we think about it in terms of producers. So, for example, if I'm a producer of, let's just say wheat. Okay, I'm a producer of wheat. If I'm a producer of wheat, I have a certain number of acres that I can grow. Because I'm a farmer, and a farmer has their farm, and their farm has a certain number of acres. So by definition, I'm in the short run. Because I can't choose all the possible acres that I could plant wheat. I can only choose up to the number of acres that I have.
So that's a short run.
That's a short run because I've got this restricted, this factor of production, this input that I can't change, which is the amount of land that I have. I can't change it in the short run.
So in micro, there's never a long run?
In micro, it's unlikely that you're ever operating in the long run. You're always operating in the short run. Always have something fixed.
So it's not that way in micro? We're not always operating in the short run and macro as well?
So in macro, as a general rule, the world is throwing shocks at us. So there's never, I mean, think of the time when there wasn't a shock.
So there isn't a macro there either?
No, not really.
Macro is just an ideal.
Yes.
An idea.
Yes. All of them. The long run tends to be an idea.
I guess like a long run goal or something.
That's exactly right. Because the short run is something that you live in, and the long run is something you aspire to.
And some people want to call this a long run or what were the words we used last week?
Permanent.
Yeah, permanent
and transitory.
Some people don't want to call it transitory because it's so long.
Yeah.
It's been like 2 years, maybe 3?
It's been a year and a half at most.
Well, didn't it start in 2019 end of that?
What, the price is going up or the price is going up? If you're talking about inflation.
Just COVID.
Yeah, so. Yeah, but yeah.
So that's not as long as the Great Depression, and the Great Depression was not all. But
it was a short run too.
It was also a short run. It's just a longer short run than we are in.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Likely be in.
That's right.
Because we're kind of coming out, aren't we?
I hope so. Yes, the economy will resolve itself, and the people that we allow to work the economy do a good job of trying to balance it correctly. To include Congress.
Right.
I mean, they do. I'm not. Oftentimes, I think that they're incompetent, but they do their job the way they should do their job, and it works out.
And the fact that there's the pull and the push makes it so that not too much damage can be done at once, and it can kind of.
So on the one hand, you can't do too much damage. On the other hand, you can't do too much good either. So I mean, it's a good thing actually.
Right. It can move slow enough that the people who are too old and can't figure it out, they'll be gone by the time it changes.
So the thing about the microeconomic long run is that the microeconomic long run defines kind of perfection.
Well, that's daunting.
Yeah, it is. It's very daunting. If we ever got to the microeconomic long run, we would be in this perfect place where the economy produced the things that we wanted at the lowest possible price that they could be produced at. And so consumers would be able to get as much stuff as they possibly could. And all of the producers would be making as much money as they could in any other. Nothing would make them better off. So they couldn't be better off. And so this long run thing is really kind of. It was described by Adam Smith as the invisible hand, and Adam Smith didn't really understand where it took it. But it takes a marketplace to a place where producers are producing stuff at the lowest possible average cost of production.
That's a mouthful.
And they're pricing it at that lowest possible cost of production. So the market for barley couldn't have a lower price and still exist.
I think of Walmart when you say that.
Walmart?
They really put things...
Yeah. So You've got the producer who's forced to charge the lowest possible price to allow their market to exist. And you go, wow, that's unfortunate for the producer. But because the producer is choosing to produce there is nothing else they can do with their resources that would pay better. So they're making the most they possibly can, charging the lowest possible price for that market to exist. Weird, huh?
Yeah.
I'm walking around, I'm eating my barley going, oh, those producers, booger-eating morons, selling it, they don't understand. I'd pay a lot more for this barley, but they're not charging more, and I'm so happy.
But the producers...
The producers walking around going, see those consumers out there? They're booger-eating morons. They don't understand. I can't make any more money doing anything else except producing this barley. I'm raking it in better than I ever could in anything else.
So totally balanced happiness points.
Yeah, absolutely balanced happiness points. And that's what's really funny. We call economics the dismal science. And what you end up with is this long run equilibrium where it's like nirvana. It's perfect happiness. We're just like, happy.
So long run, short run, we've talked about it.
Yeah.
I kind of have it clear in my head, but not really. I kind of do. I thought I did with my little magnets at the very beginning, but you toppled my tower over.
Did I topple your tower over?
That's okay. Because we can do this again next week.
We can talk more next week, yes.
Yeah, we'll continue on. The goal of these conversations is to bring people like me who don't know econ kind of on board with what happens in the economic arena, because it can be so opaque. And for me, when we have conversations, not even here, he makes things clear. And if that's something you want, then continue to come back. And also, if you have questions, please let us know what they are. Give us clips. Last week's was inspired by a clip one of our watchers gave us. So anyway, we're good?
I'm good.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Sarah D.
I'm Dr. D. May the peace of God in me recognize the peace of God in you.
Make it a great day.